Wait a minute. Are you telling me I can live my fantasy of being a samurai in an old school movie?
What? Did we just become best friends? Yup!
Then what are we waiting for? Let's go! In Trek to Yomi, you're transported into a cinematic side-scrolling action game where you play as Hiroki, a young samurai who lets his own ego and greed cost him a very hefty price. The story takes Hiroki on a self-reflecting journey as you try to right your wrongdoings within Yomi, the Japanese word for underworld. The story is pretty easy to follow with a couple small twists and turns here and there to dice up the plot just a little bit, but going on a self-reflecting redemption story isn't going to be a groundbreaking narrative. I did enjoy the story and the overarching reasons as to why you're going on a slashing fest through the underworld. There were a couple times in the underworld where it felt a little repetitive, mostly because they threw all of the underworld enemy types at you early on. Because of this, the fighting and pacing felt a little like a rinse and repeat in moments throughout the game. While the story isn't groundbreaking, you are presented with a few fork-in-the-road moments that determine how the rest of the story is going to unfold. These fork-in-the-road moments add a level of replayability to the game because there are additional endings depending on which path you choose. Trek to Yomi took about 6 hours to complete the game, which makes wanting to go back and try those other decision trees way more compelling and very enticing. The combat is what intrigued me the most about Trek to Yomi because it looked like a gory, challenging, but satisfying system. Playing as a samurai, your combat revolves around your katana. You do unlock some ranged weapons throughout the campaign, but the focus in combat always goes back to the blade in your hands. The attacks feel crisp and is paired so nicely with great sound design that makes you feel like you're doing some real damage. The moves that you have at your disposal are unlocked as you explore the map and take out new enemy types. All of the attacks and mechanics are a mix of button combos that provide a mix of light, heavy, and stun attacks. Once you unlock the ability to briefly stun enemies, you gain access to the finishing ability, which is hands down the most satisfying part of the combat system. Those moments of finishing off tougher enemies left a smile on my face and wanting to find more enemies to do it to. Since all of the combat is 2D side-scrolling, it is very, very important to become proficient in your parry and dodge moves. This game is not a game to button mash because you will get punished for it. As you learn enemy moves, you can intuitively figure out which attack moves work best against varying enemies. My only two gripes about the combat system is that sometimes turning around was difficult or not as responsive as the rest of the combat system. It wasn't the end of the world, but it definitely caused me to die and have to start at a checkpoint more than a handful of times. The other minor complaint is that some enemies, and even some of the more powerful enemies, were pretty easy to cheese. I found on more than one occasion that there was a boss fight that I could parry, stab, parry, stab, parry, stab, parry, stab, over and over and over and over and over and over, and essentially freeze the enemy into 2 animations. I didn't play it on my most difficult setting, but it still felt cheap at times. The cinematic black and white art style was an absolute treat for my eyes. The gorgeous and epic backdrops paired with dynamic angles created epic fighting moments throughout the game. I loved the black and white, heavy film grain look as it immersed me into the world and felt like I was in a film. The way this game looks and plays, it makes for an experience that is enjoyable even for someone who is just watching the game being played. My only complaint with the presentation of the game is a minor issue with some of the dialogue not working. As I got closer to the end of the 6-hour playthrough, I found that some of the NPCs and characters that I would talk to would have their subtitles show, but the voice acting would be dead silent. I originally thought my headset died until my character began to speak his lines and realized what was happening. It is a small issue, but when you're trying to make a game look like a film, it does become a little more noticeable when half the party isn't talking during a dialogue set. When you get down to it, Trek to Yomi is a fun and challenging side-scrolling action adventure that leaves you feeling like the badass samurai you always dreamt of being as a kid. With the price point being $20, it's easy to look past the very minor performance issues in the game because the combat and art style is worth the $20 experience alone. Plus, you're presented with enough moral options throughout your playthrough that you'll be left wondering what the other paths could lead you towards. While some of the enemies and fights got briefly repetitive, the combat always felt satisfying as you behead your enemies and slice them into pieces. If you have Game Pass, then this is a no-brainer game to pick up and give it a go. Trek to Yomi will challenge you to nail your parries and counter moves, but it is not to the difficulty level of a Dark Souls or an Elden Ring game. At the end of the day, that's really all you want to do, is feel like a badass katana-wielding samurai. And luckily, Trek to Yomi accomplishes that. If that sounds like a good time to you, then this game will surely deliver on that promise. Thank you so much for watching this review of Trek to Yomi. What do you think of the art style and combat? Does a $20 price tag scare you away from a game because you're worried it might be bad? Let me know in the comments what you think. If you enjoyed the video, please show some love to the like and subscribe button so you don't miss out on the future content. Thank you again for taking your time to watch this video of Trek to Yomi. I'm Josh Robinson with Joystick Gamer, and I order you to stay gaming out there.